How is social media westernizing the Filipino culture? This is Roanne Samuels. I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in California. Now, if you've listened to me before, I have mentioned and will keep mentioning that for every culture, there's always a shadow, a negative, and a light side, the positive side. So, of course, there's something positive about the Western culture. When I say westernized, the Filipino culture and the Western culture are very different culture. One is very individualistic and Filipino culture is very collectivistic. So I am framing my contrasting based on those facets. Now, if you're consuming social media, so you might be using Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, I'm talking about those social media, but also the mediums that we now use, how we consume our news on Facebook or on the internet. Um, First one that it would something to ponder on how we are changing our culture simply by consuming social media is Filipinos are very relational. And this is very hard for if you were born in America, in Canada, because especially the elders would make comments sometimes just simply by greeting, in which they might ask a weird question. Oh, kailan ka magkakaanak? When are you going to have your own kids? In which we should learn from each other. If we know that this offends the young, so maybe we don't want to ask that question. But if you are the generation living in the West, just note that the way that Filipinos ask, when I say Filipino, I'll just talk about Filipino immigrants or Filipino in the islands. They ask not from a task oriented question, meaning they don't necessarily may need an answer. It's like they use it as a greeting. Their questions are more relational questioning, in which they are using it to connect, to actually go to a deeper or more of a topic that is mutually enjoyable for both. But they don't know yet, so they're gauging. This is one of the reasons why social media is not really, in my opinion, is almost the opposite of the Filipino culture as we know it. It's very relational. In social media, it's very transactional. So that's the first one. Second, we know there are cultures that are high context and low context. So the Western culture is very low context. We teach our children, say what you mean so that you can get your needs met. In many cultures that are high context, which is the Filipino culture, is one of those high context culture. There's a lot of things to consider than just the linguistics. Um, we talk with our bodies, and I have a video that I could link below how Filipinos talk with their bodies. And those are the things you miss when you're communicating with somebody just simply using social media. So the more we use it, we're priming not just our communication, but truly our brain, because our brain changes from what we call, it's neuroplastic. So it changes based on repetition of what we're doing. It could also change based on trauma, even a single incident, but it's traumatic. We could remember that more brain wise and body wise. Um, and so the more we do it, one of the reason that it's likely that we are westernizing the Filipino culture, you could check out the book called Shallows. And I forgot the author, but I could link it, in which the thesis of that book is that now our brains are evolving to read information in a more shallow manner because of the way we consume our information. Now, so that's the second part. The context is lost. Next is just what I mentioned. The Western culture is very linguistic. You would know a culture that's very linguistic with the laws that they have. The more laws, It's likely that they are more linguistic. It's coming from the history of the Roman Empire. And you can just check your own history. But for instance, if you say to someone, "Ay, ang pangit," okay? First of all, don't say that to just anyone. But let me just give you this example. The often, if you were raised in not in the Philippines, if somebody just said, "I am pangit," without any other context, it's very rude, and we don't say that. So because the linguistic is very also visual, so you're just saying what you're seeing. Um, but the word pangit is very multisensorial. If you were raised in the Philippines, you will say, "Ay, ang pangit ng amoy. It smells bad. Ang pangit ng dating. The energy is not good." And so we have so many pangit ng lasa, talking about taste. So it's multisensorial. We have a little bit more practice with using that adjective. I'm using this as an example that it means a lot more than meets the eye. So again, when some culture is very linguistic, it's also very visual. Why Filipino culture could be more westernized by your use of the social media is it misses a lot of the multisensorial. People can easily get offended by a simple word because the word now is caged in a singular meaning. Um, Filipinos are actually, um, maybe prior to social media, knows that there are many meanings, and so they're curious. They query what do they actually mean, rather than just the perceived meaning of the receiver. So that's the gift of um, the Filipino culture, and when we're not consuming too much of the social media. Also, next is the medium. Okay, so like I mentioned, it's not just the content, but the medium. So if you're consuming news, usually people consume news by just reading the headlines and not the fine print. And so we're becoming more activated. And rather than, again, piggybacking on the last point, we're wondering, what does that really mean? Who's that person? Why is he writing this? We become less curious. We just kind of get on the case without knowing much about the case, thinking about the case critically. And so as much as social media could be helpful, at some point, it is also quite harmful in many ways. Uh, Finally, the one that I would share why social media will potentially westernize the Filipino culture, because many of the influencers are using the lens of the Western culture. I mean, just the characters, how many characters you can write. Most of us are using English, in which we know, if especially if you are, it's not so much that Filipinos are not able to speak English, they're known to be bilingual, but the context, many of our cultural meanings are not easily translatable in English. So we could speak English. We don't need a cultural or our language interpreter. But actually, having lived in America, that's what I found is that many, especially the immigrant and the Filipino American, are needing cultural interpreters. So I just gave you 5 reasons on how social media could potentially westernize the Filipino culture. And always when I'm giving these videos, what to do about it, right? Um, Very, very simple. It's be aware of your awareness of consumption. So be aware of what you're consuming, um, who's writing it and why they're writing it. So be critical about that. How long, are you on social media for 2 hours at a time? And then how much you're consuming. So just being consumption practice consumption awareness, my friend. And then when you are closer back to your own body, you're more relational, you can again pick up on nuances in the culture, not just by the meaning you perceive it to be as the listener, but but widening your lens on ano ba talagang ibig nilang sabihin? What do they really mean? Then you're expanding um, just your perception. I hope this has been helpful. Visit calamansijuice.com. I have many articles there on mental health, Filipino culture, on relationship. Marami pong salamat sa pakikinig. Ingat po lagi. This is Roanne Digia Samuels, licensed psychotherapist here in California. Bye!